You started playing drums, I assume, when you were a young person.
Yeah, probably about 10 or so. My brother, who's here in Boston, he was a big inspiration. He was around the time that I started playing, or a little bit after. He was the head of the jazz department at New England Conservatory, so he was bringing home records, and he was really important early on, just to get me hip immediately, with records, just bringing home crates of records. I just happened to grow up with like 4 or 5 guys in a small town who were all really good. One of them, Steve Davis, is a trombone player. He played in Blakey's last band. He plays with Jackie McLean, and the last thing he did was Chick Corea. So he was in my high school. And Tony Cadillac was the lead trumpet player. He's the lead player for Frank Sinatra, Maria Schneider, Barbra Streisand. I mean, he's like one of the top lead players. So these were the guys that I grew up with. So it just happened to be, I just got lucky. And we used to play every Monday night in the only jazz club in town, and that was luck. 2 things happened that were really great. One year, Woody Herman's band came for a whole week, did workshops in the day and concerts at night, and that was like, very eye-opening. And then Bob's small group came the next year. So both of those things were, those really helped, because I didn't really get to New York when I was younger. So those bringing New York to Binghamton, that really helped. And like I said, my teacher, he was a very old school teacher, rudimental. He was an older guy, and he was totally into rudiments and reading and just fundamentals. It was, he wasn't really into even rock, or pop music of today, or for him, Art Blakey was like kind of avant-garde. He was like, yeah, I saw Art Blakey a couple times, and it was, I don't know, it's crazy, So it was nice to have a teacher like that. My brother got me really into like classical music and studying all the percussion instruments. So I studied marimba, and then I went to Eastman and studied all the instruments, timpani and all that. I did that, and then I stayed for an extra year and got a degree in composition, jazz composition, so that, I was really involved in that. And then just made my way to New York. There's not really anyone in particular. I like them all so much, I can't think of anyone in particular. I mean, I went through phases. There was an Art Blakey phase, there was an Elvin Jones phase, there was a Tony Williams phase, there was a big Jack DeJohnette phase. Philly Joe, there's not really one drummer that sticks out for me. I like them all for what they do. Well, Roy Haynes, to me, he's always got a really tight thing going on. It's very danceable, very high pitched. The drums are very high pitched, and it's just very danceable and very kind of tight, in a good way. And there's just a lot of humor, and he's this one tune called Snap, Crackle, and Pop, and that to me is like Roy Haynes, very, just snappy. Elvin, I don't know where, like I said, there's places that Elvin came from, but really it's you'd have to do a whole book on it, because it seems like he just came out of nowhere, and the stuff he's doing, it's just unbelievable. It just changed everything.
Like what?
For me, he was kind of the beginning of being really bass drum oriented. So he uses his bass drum a lot, and really accents a lot with the bass drum and the cymbal, and then also that combined with, he's triplet oriented, so he's filling in with triplets almost all the time. And he's also playing in 3/4, even though everyone's in 4/4. He's kind of playing a 3/4 thing a lot. He's doing this 3/4 over 4/4, like maybe those 3 elements. Plus, he's just got this totally swinging, ferocious, sound. Very warm, though, extremely warm. I heard Roy Haynes and then Elvin play once, and you could really hear the difference. Elvin is just he's got this warm thing. I don't know how he does it. Billy Joe, I feel, is coming from rudiments. His whole, if you study the rudiments, that was my first teacher, was a rudimental snare drummer. So you study the rudiments, and then you can apply them to the drum set, and that's where a lot of his thing comes from. He's snare drum oriented. So like when he goes to fills, a lot of times it's really based on the snare drum, and he incorporates the toms and the bass drum, but it's really snare drum oriented. That's the biggest thing I could say. When I think of Philly Joe, I think of rudiments. Art Blakey's like kind of this total like African master drummer from Ghana who just kind of slipped over or something, because there's some very kind of African thing about him. I mean, obviously he's Afro-American, but just really like the drumming thing is really, once you start studying like African drumming and stuff, and then you go back and listen to Art Blakey, it's like, that's what he sounds like. Really, I find it amazing. I really like Art Blakey for dynamics. He could play really, really loud, but then bring it way down, and they do that just in one song. And just the way he led a band, I mean, I saw him, I think he was just a great band leader on stage, the way he did it. I don't even know how he did it, but he had so many great bands. You can't play with Bob Brookmeyer without thinking about Mel Lewis, like, every time. When I was in high school, we did a high school kind of jazz festival, and Mel Lewis was one of the judges, and he came up and played on my drum set, and that was like eye-opening because he got like a completely different sound on my drum set than I'd ever heard or will hear. It was just this extremely warm thing, and he was magical because it didn't really look like he was doing much. And you can't really put into words what he was doing. And when people try to copy, I mean, it sounds good, but I don't know. He just had something special that he developed. I think from talent, but experience too, because he was just playing big bands, his whole life. He somehow can make a big band sound really free and like a small group, because it's totally clear where the beat is. And I mean, Bob has told me from his perspective why he thinks Mel is great, and I've tried to soak that in. He plays a lot on his left hand. He plays a lot of inner beats on his left hand. And what Bob says is that people can't really, a lot of times in a big band, people can't really hear the beat on the cymbal. And sometimes they can hear it on the hi-hat, they try, but if you play a lot of beats on the snare drum, there's no question about where it is. They're like, okay, I know where it is, so it's not something that you really, you hear really, because it's very soft, but he was always playing a lot of stuff with his left hand. He also was a master of feathering the bass drum, so he had this big lamb's wool beater. And, he was so great at just playing the bass drum very softly, which is like an art, and he could do it, so it really just kind of created this, I think that helped him create that really warm sound. And he would, set up a band, in a way so that it totally made sense. If someone was going to come in on 4, he would play in a way so that those guys coming in on 4 just completely made sense, it's natural. And that's really hard to do. I mean, everything he did was really hard to do, but it didn't really look like he was doing anything, so it's very strange to see him play and hear him, and the people, I sub in the Vanguard band using Mel's drums, and the guys in the band, I mean, each one of them just will come up to you afterwards and tell you, why they think Mel was great, and this is what Mel did, and, I mean, the respect that the guys in his band had for him is unbelievable. I mean, it's still to this day, they have his drum set and they play that music every Monday night, I mean, they just have such a love for him. I think from composing, I try to hear it as a composer, so I try to find whatever sound is going to be clear and will come out and won't be in anyone's way. So for instance, tom-toms are in the register of like bass and guitar and cello and tenor sax, and you have to be careful, really careful with tom-toms, because they can just kind of make everything muddy. Cymbals take away a lot of overtones, so you have to be careful with cymbals in some cases. You know, if you just stop playing your cymbals, you'll realize, especially if you write the piece, you'll hear things that you can't hear when cymbals are playing. So, but basically, you know, cymbals are high, and cymbals are a drummer's way of sustaining. Those are our long notes, you know. So if you want to sustain, there you go, that's the cymbals. And that's what's especially nice about a sizzle cymbal, it sustains for longer. The snare drum is probably the easiest to stand out, and so that, you know, it's the clearest thing, and that's probably why it's right in the center, and it's, you know, kind of the center of what we do, you know, because it just has its own, it's very distinct, doesn't really get in anyone's way, can be the loudest instrument in the band, and it can be the softest instrument in the band, so it's pretty versatile. And hi-hat, I mean, I try to think of hi-hat more just as another voice. You know, in traditional jazz, hi-hat is on 2 and 4. But, you know, somewhere along the line, people, you know, got away from that. And I try to also just to wean the people I'm playing with, I try to wean them off that idea of the hi-hat on 2 and 4. And once they get used to it, you know, then I can just treat it just like another instrument. Pursue being a musician and not pursue being a drummer as much, you know, because, you know, being a drummer is fine, but if I was another musician, I'd want to play with a drummer who's a musician instead of a drummer who's a drummer, who thinks like a drummer, you know. So I think, you know, you start studying theory, you start studying piano, you start studying composition, the history of music, study some other instruments, you know, just try to, you know, get your palette, like if you're, you know, you widen your palette so that, you know, when you come into whatever it is, if you're doing a klezmer gig, you got it, you know. If you're doing a whatever gig, you know, you have some resources because you've heard that kind of music. I mean, sometimes I've been on gigs where I end up doing this, like, I don't even know what you call it, a Beach Boys thing or something. I mean, I don't really remember checking out the Beach Boys, but I have definitely heard the Beach Boys and those kind of things, so it just comes out, you know. And so I would just listen to music, all kinds of music, as much as possible. Not really, don't say no to anything, really. Just, like, do it all, you know. It's only going to help you in the end.